Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cricket Talks. I'm joined by Aaron, the cricket connoisseur. Thank you so much for jumping on.
Well, Ethan, it's an absolute pleasure. Obviously, as an England fan, I wish it was in different circumstances. I imagine one of us is going to be a lot happier than the other after
Yeah,
that first test in Brisbane. But I'm going to be honest, look, Australia deserved it. I say that through gritted teeth with my England cap on, but as a cricket fan, Australia by far outplayed England. Bowling was superb on that first day. And then Travis Head, I know we're going to talk about this knock as the podcast progresses, but 152 with a 102 strike rate, the third fastest century in Ashes history. Bear in mind, 139 years of history, and it's the third fastest ever. Outstanding. Absolutely remarkable. I mean, if we see that Travis Head throughout the rest of the series, England are in a lot of trouble. But all in all, mate, yeah, pretty tired. I did all-nighters for each of the 4 days. I've been doing some local radio work, so I've had to stay up for each and every single ball, which at times was a lot harder than others, in particular when England were batting in that first innings. But all in all, a deserving win for the Aussies. And yeah, for England, plenty to ponder about and improve heading into Adelaide.
well, I'm glad you're working on local radio. Good on you. Well, I do a music show as well on community radio, so
Oh,
I guess
nice.
we can relate. And onto the Ashes, I just have to say, it was one of those games where we saw that partnership, but then they just topple England. They have that 2 or 3 really good batsmen, but players like Ollie Pope are good, but they're not there yet. If you know what I mean by
Oh,
there. They're not
100%.
at the
100%. Not
spot
like
where they're like,
Marnus
I can
with
hit lots of
Australia.
runs. Yeah, they'll be there at some point. We've seen players in England that are just fantastic. Look at Ben Stokes. That was a relief for England. Look at Joe Root, all these type of players. But the key is the Australian bowling attack. They had 30 overs of just completely getting smashed, but then the grit and determination to come back and bowl and get 8 wickets in a session. Fantastic. And what about Travis Head? As you were saying, you're 100% right. And it's one of those innings that even half cricket fans would be talking about it. It was just fabulous. And Nathan Lyon getting 400 wickets, all these things from this Ashes test. It's just a brilliant game. Following it live, absolute honour, isn't it, Aaron?
Well, it depends. It depends what perspective I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Obviously, with the cricket cap on, yes, Nathan Lyon joining the exclusive 400 Test wickets club, just the third Australian in history to ever do that behind Shane Warne and Glenn McGrath. And then Travis Head, the guy was averaging 18.3 for Sussex in this year's county championship. And out of nowhere, he goes and hits 152 against England on the biggest stage of all. But as I said, from an Aussie perspective, it doesn't really get much better, to be completely honest. But I'm an England fan. So I'm a little bit torn, to be honest, because I wanted a better performance. We got that on day 3 from the likes of Dad Milan and Joe Root, but it was the same old mistakes keep creeping in time and time and time again. It is frustrating at times. And you know who I feel for? I really feel for the likes of Mark Wood and Ollie Robinson and Chris Wokes, because they bowled their absolute heart out against the Aussies in that first innings and then got absolutely no backing with the bats. I mean, 8 for 77 on day 4. Everyone here in England, let me just give you our perspective, Ethan. There was talk on Twitter of 400, 450 plus, 500, 600. We didn't even reach 300. So that is
I know.
something that needs to be addressed heading into the rest of this series. And in terms of technique, I don't think it was necessary technique. I think in this particular game, it was application or lack thereof from an English perspective. If you looked at the likes of Travis Head, if you looked at the likes of David Warner, I know he was incredibly lucky, and we might talk about that in the podcast, and Marnus, one thing that they did really well was knowing when to leave the ball. It's such an important attribute and characteristic to have on these Aussie tracks, knowing when to attack, knowing when to defend, knowing when to leave. And Australia did that to perfection. England, meanwhile, didn't. I mean, in that second innings, I could list you 5 dismissals, which were completely avoidable, shots that did not need to be played whatsoever. So that was the difference between the two sides. Australia applied themselves better. They got the big scores compared to England, who only had Milan and Root in that regard. And yeah, that is where England lost this test, and that is where Australia won it.
For sure there. And we saw those Australian batsmen, even the ones that got out, the damage was done, honestly. And I think when we move on to Adelaide, having Anderson and Broad there will increase the depth of the side. They will actually go in fresh and bowl fast, and it'll give the other good bowlers a chance to rest. So having that and the conditions not in England's favour. Hot, 33 degrees, really stinking hot, horrible weather for English people to go through if you're a cricketer. Even though they played in the World Cup, it's still pretty hard. They will do well in Adelaide because it's cooler. There's dew that comes into factor in the night session. There's Anderson and Broad. I will be surprised if England gets smashed in the next test. I don't know what your thoughts are, but England will do well in Adelaide and even in places like Hobart. And they'll do well in. They'll do moderate in Sydney and Melbourne, not horribly. That's just what I feel. This is like the one bad test that they were going to get. And Chris Silverwood, the England coach, probably would be aware of that, as I would say. Don't you think?
Well, it's an interesting one, Ethan, because again, as an England fan, I would love to see us win in Adelaide. And you mentioned it all there, the dew factor, the swing factor, the different ball, cooler conditions, because it's a day-night match. But England have never won an overseas day-night test. We've lost all three of them. We lost in Ahmedabad against India, we lost against New Zealand, and we lost in the 17-18 Ashes at this venue by about 100 runs as well. So the key with England, it'll suit our bowlers down to the ground. Of course it will. The likes of Jimmy Anderson, Stuart Broad. I imagine Chris Woakes will retain his place for this particular test match because he is the king of swing in terms of those English bowlers. But it's the batting again. I mean, this is a side which, aside from Joe Root, not a single player has broken the 500 run mark in 2021. It's a massive concern. It really is. The fact that Dom Sibley, who has barely played a test in 2021, has not even played for half a year, missed the entirety of the India series. He is still England's fourth leading run scorer in 2021. I mean, something needs to happen. Something has to be addressed. And again, I think at the Gabba, it was less about technique. At the Adelaide Oval, it will be about technique against the swinging ball. And it all comes down to discipline. It all comes down to temperament. It all comes back to that overwhelming theme, that overarching theme of applying yourself well. And if England can do that, they've got a chance. But again, it remains to be seen. And it's all speculation at the moment. When the chips are down, when the pressure's on, England have got to bat well and we've got to bat long. That will be the key to winning this particular test match.
100% there. And I think with the Australian side, they can't be too arrogant. They've got a challenging test coming up here, and they can't be like, oh, we won, how good, we're going to win the Ashes now. It's not 5-0, it's not like 2006. I'm sorry, but with the Australian side, they've got a good energy to them. I think they're more likely to win, but I don't think it's like a 90-10. I think it's like a 60-40 type thing. I think it'll be 2-all the Ashes because it's Brisbane after all that's rubbish to play in. And England are now aware of which players suit Australian conditions. Now, Haseeb Hameed doesn't quite suit the conditions. Rory Burns doesn't quite, from what we've seen. And even Ollie Pope doesn't really. And Butler, he'll get going in the day-night tests because he's under lights. He's more of that type of mode player. He'll probably attack the ball a bit more. That'll be a better mode. If England go out there and bat the day-night test, open the batting, and they have a good partnership and get through the first day, the players will have their eye in by the time they reach night session. They'll do fine. Then they'll bat for the rest of day two and hit a massive total of 500, 550. And then you get to the night session and Anderson will run in and get Australia 4 for 20. 100%. But it's a matter of making sure that there's depth in the side and that they're confident with the team. And I think with rotating sides, the rotation policy is an extreme, right? But then if you don't rotate at all, then it's also the Australian strategy that could also kill the Australian team and kill the English team in the heat. Don't you reckon?
Yeah, rotation in a series of this magnitude as well is so important. I mean, I know the first test and there's a lot of, different reactions here in England with regards to how it's gone, but there's still 4 test matches. As you said, it's not 4-5-0 yet. It might be. We don't know. But at the same time, England could come back. That's the beauty of a long test series. You've got the time to allow those narratives and stories to develop. So for me personally, it comes back to that theme yet again, Ethan. And you mentioned it there. If England can bat long. Because we haven't seen it in 2021. We've seen it on one occasion, and that was in Chennai. And Joe Root scored a double ton. And Dom Sibley scored 87. And England won the test. But aside from that, it's yet to be seen. I mean, it's all well and good saying that, Hamid, Burns, they could come good, but they have to now. I mean, in particular, Rory Burns, I have such high expectations of this guy. I've been watching him for years for Surrey and county cricket. And in my opinion, he probably is England's best opener. And he showed that over the years. He showed that he can go big. He did it in the 2019 Ashes. He did it this summer against New Zealand, but he has to show consistency. And he is the most experienced of that top three in terms of England tests now. It's not up to Haseeb Hameed to score runs every single test. He's a young, relatively inexperienced batsman. It's up to Rory Burns to shoulder that responsibility, dig in, show some grit, show some fight. And yes, as an opening batsman, you are going to fail a lot more times than you succeed. That's just the nature of the job. But he has to show a bit more about his game now. If you look at that Gabba test and that first dismissal, may I just say a great stat as well with this? Just the second time in Ashes history that the first ball of the series has ever resulted in a wicket since 1936, when Stan Worthington was dismissed by Ernie McIntosh at the Gabba. That doesn't set the right precedent for the series. And that kind of, it just got England off to such a poor start. If Burns can dig in, if he can frustrate the Aussie seamers, if he can put together an innings of 50 plus even with Haseeb Hameed, it just sets the right tone for an English innings. When you've got the likes of Dad Milan who can dig in, you've got the likes of Joe Root who can do it all. You have got the powerful middle order of Ben Stokes, Ollie Pope, Joss Butler, potentially Chris Woakes as well. I just feel like in this particular test and for the rest of the series, Rory Burns is going to be a key protagonist from an English perspective.
Good point. So that's what we're seeing from the England side. Let's look at England A right now, or the England Lions, sorry, and Australia A.
Mm-hmm.
And we noticed from the England Lions, James Bracey was a star. 113 runs off 295 balls. He took his time, but he had grit and determination. Does he have a chance at playing for England, perhaps? Or Josh Bohannon or someone like that? Do you reckon they could become a replacement for someone like Haseeb Hameed? Because Burns will eventually come back into form and hit some runs in this Ashes series. Just a matter of time. Is Haseeb Hameed or Ollie Pope going to get dropped, do you think?
It's an interesting one. If it's up to me for these first three test matches, you have to stick with the same batting lineup. Okay, you've made your bed, now lie in it. It's as simple as that. If you change out Ollie Pope right now, it's completely the wrong message. And something which England have struggled with in the past 12 months is stability in that middle order. I mean, Ollie Pope, he's played 20 test matches since 2018. It's not a lot of tests. And the reason why is because England keep chopping and changing. One series, it's Pope. The next series, it's Lawrence. The next series, it's Stokes in that position, or Bairstow. Chris Silverwood has made his decision. He thought that was the best batting lineup. He has to stick with it now. Because if you take Ollie Pope out, that sends out completely the wrong message. It means that Australia are probably going to, have that little extra pep in their step. Oh, look what we've done. We've got rid of Ollie Pope. Okay, let's get Lawrence next, or let's get Bairstow. You've got to stick with that stable middle order. So for me, I wouldn't make any changes with regards to England's batting lineup just yet. Later on in the series, maybe you could bring in a Dan Lawrence if Ollie Pope is still struggling. With Haseeb, I want to see him get the entire series. He is still a young batsman. He is relatively inexperienced. So I think, again, sends out the wrong message if you drop him this early. In terms of those two names you mentioned as well, James Bracey and Josh Bohannon. It's funny you mentioned Josh Bohannon. I literally tweeted this yesterday. I think we're going to see him in an England shirt in 2022. I think one more season in the Championship for Lancs. The guy has a career career first-class average, of 44. He averaged 53.81 in this year's County Championship, and he scored 51 last night against Australia A. If he can, just get one more good season under his belt, I think he could be perfect at number 3, in my opinion. And then with James Bracey, he's another one. We saw him this summer against New Zealand. He batted at 7, had a terrible time of it because he's not a number 7. He is a wicket keeper, but he's not a number 7. He's a number 3. What happens when you play him at number 3? Well, Ethan, he goes and scores 113. That's...
Yeah, Joe Root's in the way, isn't it, at number 3? That's the issue. You can't... Could we make Bracey open the batting? Would he be a better opener than a number 7, perhaps? Or put him in a slightly different spot that's better than number 7? Would that work?
It's an interesting one, potentially. But I think for me, if Bracey is to make an England team, he has to play at number 3, which is really tough now because you have got Dowd Milan, and Milan has literally just scored 82, and he's averaging 38 in 2021. I mean,
knock down Milan. If
no,
Milan
that's
gets
the
injured,
problem.
then we'll get Bracey. Well, England will get Bracey.
Yes. I think in
Definitely.
terms of depth, as a squad depth player, 100% should be in and around the squad. And even if he's not playing, learning. James Bracey is 24 years of age. I mean, he's got a big ceiling. He's got a very promising future. Just have him in and around the squad. Have him playing Lions games. It's perfect for his development. So, in terms of the series, coming back onto that, that main question yet again, I wouldn't make any batting changes just yet. If England do go down 2, possibly 3-0, but we don't want that as England fans, then yes, you do need to make changes. But for the time being, stick with Ollie Pope, have faith in Haseeb Hameed, and yeah, in terms of the future, maybe look to the likes of a James Bracey or a Josh Mahannon or a Tom Abel.
Cool. And we haven't seen much from the bowlers for the England Lions, have we? We've seen people like Sakeem Mahmood not getting wickets, and even Matt Fisher only 1 for 49, Liam Norwell 0 for 35, 2 for 157 for Dom Bess, and 1 for 62 for Rob Yates. And so we haven't seen that much from the bowlers in England Lions. So that's going to be a challenge for England leading into the future. What are England going to do in bowling rotation wise if they can't have Anderson or Broad, or they can't have enough players? Or do you think they have a rich enough bowling lineup that they're okay at the moment? They don't need England Lions players. What are your thoughts?
Oh, it's a tough question. Obviously, we don't want that to happen. We want a fully fit, same battery heading into the rest of the series. But in terms of backups, Liam Norwell, to be fair, I'm a Warwickshire fan for those who don't know, so accept there will be a little bit of bias here, but he did take a fifer in the first innings of that Lions Australia A game, and he bowled beautifully, in my opinion. And he is a nice hit the deck bowler. I think he suits Australia's conditions quite nicely. So maybe as a backup, I'm not saying as a starter, as much as I'd love to see it. I wouldn't put him in just yet. But I think in terms of England's seam attack, I don't think that's the problem. I'm going to be completely honest. It's the batting.
Yeah.
And you can also argue the spin department and the mismanagement
100%.
of our spinners.
100%.
First it was Moeen, then it was Dom Bess, now it's Jack Leach. There's a pattern arriving here. Okay, and it's not a good one. And those spinners, may I just say, are a lot better than what those performances suggest. But it's about how they're managed. And if you want to go into more detail on that, Ethan, we can as the podcast progresses, because there are a lot of thoughts to be said with regards to England's management of spin bowlers since Graham Swan. But going back onto that original point about the seam bowlers, with the likes of Ollie Robinson, with the likes of Jimmy, with the likes of Stuart Broad, Wokes, Craig Overton as well. Craig Overton did well in the last Ashes against Australia. I do think we've got a rich enough bowling attack. It's just the batting. That's all it comes down to. England have got the bowlers to take 20 wickets a match. But do we have the same batsmen who can carry England to 450 plus to make sure that those 20 wickets actually matter?
Australia and England have similar problems to each other, which was what makes the Ashes exciting. Now, on the Australian side, if Warner is too badly injured or people don't want Harris to play, there's always the youngster Bryce Street, who got 120 for Australia against the not too premium quality England Lions attack. But that player, Bryce Street, for Queensland, was a very good defensive player, if you noticed. He was really good at he's a bit like a Jeffrey Boycott of modern Australian cricket. He's one of those players that could just make runs in such a way that he doesn't care about run rate. He wants to go out, score the runs. It's fantastic to watch, wasn't it, Aaron? He's a good batsman, isn't he, Bryce Street? Do you reckon he has potential?
Yes, absolutely. I mentioned it before we started the podcast, didn't I? He was so impressive. And I'll tell you what, the conditions at the Ian Healy Oval were pretty tough on those first 2 days. The way in which he applied himself after Australia A bowled out the Lions was superb. It really was. And again, you mentioned his temperament, his grit, his resilience, his fortitude. I love batsmen like that. Personally speaking, I don't mind if a batsman has a strike rate of 25-30, as long as they're scoring runs. And Bryce Street just applied himself excellently. Now, granted that England Lions bowling attack is quite inexperienced. I mean, Sakeem Mahmood hasn't played tons of first-class cricket. Neither has Matty Fisher. Liam Norwell was arguably the most experienced bowler in that entire lineup, because he's been playing for a number of years for Gloucestershire and Warwickshire. But Even so, just brilliant, brilliant application. And again, I mentioned it earlier in the podcast, knowing when to attack, knowing when to defend, knowing when to leave. He looked like he owns the crease. And that for me is
Yeah.
such an impressive trait to have. So Bryce Street, someone to watch out for. So impressed. Love the way in which he goes about his cricket. And I tell you what, if Australia ever do need that option, that real gritty, over my dead body style of top order batsman, he's got to be in the mix, 100%.
Yes, definitely. And we've had a good chat about the Ashes. We're going to move on to the Big Bash League. We got Brisbane Heat versus Melbourne Renegades to start off with, Aaron, and then Hobart Hurricanes v Perth Scorchers, which is a massive game, followed up by Melbourne Stars versus Sydney Sixers again. So it's going to be interesting, isn't it? What's your take on it, would you say?
Yeah, it is going to be interesting. I'm going to be honest, the Big Bash, I have enjoyed it so far. I'll enjoy it even more if my beloved Sydney Thunder go on and win the thing again. So, I mean, that'd be fantastic. But the only thing that I will say about the tournament so far, maybe the crowd size has been a little bit underwhelming. I'm a little bit surprised by that, to be completely honest, because it is a good competition. Yes, it's got some strange rules. As we all know, it's not the most conventional of T20 tournaments, but there's some really good talent on offer. And this is the thing, like there's a load of good young talent. Obviously, you've got your star talent. Andre Russell has just signed for the Melbourne Stars as well. I just hope that the crowds do pick up. But in terms of the cricket, I think it's been very, very good, as it usually is. But in terms of those three games, would you like a prediction, Ethan? Because I'm terrible at predictions. Right, okay.
Yeah, don't worry, but try and give us some stats or whatever. Whatever you can think of, we want to see it.
Heat versus Renegades. It's a tough one because the Renegades, I'm going to be honest, do look like an improved side in this particular tournament compared to last year. They were in all sorts of trouble. But for me personally, I do fancy the Brisbane Heat. I think they're going to have enough in the tank. I think they've got a strong enough team to outdo the Renegades. So I will go with the Brisbane Heat winning that one. Then the second one was Hurricane Scorchers, correct? At the Blundstone Arena.
Correct. Yes. What do you think about that?
So that's a much harder one to predict. That is a really hard one to predict. In particular,
a lot of WA people playing for Hobart Hurricanes. It has to be said. So it's going to be a bit of a teammate rivalry there. It'll be kind of funny. Yeah, I don't know about that game. I think the Scorchers will probably win. What do you reckon? But then again, Hobart will win because of home conditions. It's tough. Hobart actually have a decent Big Bash crowd for their population.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they got 10 times less people, but same crowd as Sydney or Melbourne almost. So it's good.
Well, yeah, I mean,
very good crowd. Yeah,
as they call it, Tasmania's team, and they buy into it. In terms of that game, this is where I'm going to struggle here with the prediction between those two. I think they're two decent sides with good bowling attacks. I love Peter Hatzoglu, so I'm tempted to say the Perth Scorchers, but purely because it's home conditions, I think I'll go with the Hurricanes. I think the Cane Train will emerge victorious in that particular game. And then the last one, Melbourne Stars versus Sydney Sixers.
Yeah, what do you think about that game?
Sixers, definitely.
Okay. Fair enough, same. They got Philippi. Oh, I love Josh Philippi. He is a real talent. We have seen him electrify 2 massive innings and just pump it up, get going, and just smash it around. I mean, it's such a shame he didn't play for the Scorchers, but honestly, but he's quite a nice guy as well. So, wonderful man, wonderful cricketer. It's good to see him in form, I suppose, because, it's one of those things where he's just unstoppable. He's going to have a massive Big Bash tournament, don't you reckon? Same with Moses Enriquez. Enriquez will help the Sixers out as well. So, yeah, I reckon Sixers also.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, just look at the sheer strength in depth of that Sixers outfit. I mean, they've got to be one of the favourites again for the title. They really do. That top order is ridiculously stacked. I mean, you've got, as if Josh Philippi wasn't enough, he is one of the finest young batsmen in Australia. You've got James Vince, the guy who almost scored a century, didn't he? In fact, that was against the Scorchers, wasn't it?
English player. You got international stars. Honestly, I'm a bit jealous that there's a couple of these players not playing for the Scorchers, to be honest.
Same here for the Thunder. Yeah.
If WA was a team in the Big Bash, Western Warriors or whatever, they would probably win every game. to be honest. They got so many power hitters, it just wouldn't be fair almost. You know, it's
Well,
one
yeah,
of
they got
those
to be
like,
up there, wouldn't they? Marsh brothers as well. Philippi,
yeah,
Cam Green if he wasn't playing for Australia.
yeah, it'd just be a
Yeah, Western
Dane,
Australia.
Mitch
They make them
Marsh,
different.
Inglis, yeah, Joe Richardson, Jason
Ridiculous.
Berendorf. I'll tell you, WA, hey, best
They'd win
cricket
it.
state. People say New South Wales are good. Actually, New South Wales is quite a strong state as well. So those two states, New South Wales, WA is always a good clash, I reckon.
Ethan, remind me where you're from again.
WA, of
Yeah.
course, the best part of the world. I know that's biased. So one last thing to look at: Pakistan versus West Indies before we wrap up the podcast. Thoughts, predictions, anything? Thoughts and prayers, as they say.
Well, it's an interesting one with regards to this series because the West Indies have actually had a bit of a COVID outbreak in the camp. So they are going to be without some big names. I know Sheldon Cottrell's one of them. I think Jason Holder might be one as well. So again, the seam attack has taken a bit of a hit, unfortunately, for this series. But in terms of the T20s, I'm going to go Pakistan winning. In home conditions, I think they've got the bowling attack to win these games. I'm not going to say a whitewash. I think there'll be some good games in this series. I think it's a 3-match T20 series and then the tests.
Yeah.
So I imagine that Pakistan will win the T20s, in my opinion, maybe by, a couple games to 1. The tests, I'm going to go Pakistan again. To be honest, Pakistan have just been absolutely fantastic when it comes to test cricket recently. I mean, they've just beaten Bangladesh quite convincingly with not a second team, but a relatively weakened bowling attack. So again, I mean, if you're asking for predictions, probably Pakistan to win both series. To be honest, Ethan, I'm not going to say by an emphatic margin. I think the tests may be a bit more comfortably, but I do fancy Pakistan on home soil with the likes of Afridi, with the likes of not Harris Ralph, he's in the Big Bash, Hassan Ali, Shadab Khan in the T20s as well. I think they'll have enough to emerge victorious.
I do, to be honest, casually watch Quaidi Azam Trophy highlights, like the Pakistan domestic trophy. I don't really follow the scores much. I just watch it for pure entertainment because of how good the players are. They're giving it their all. So it looks like Pakistan will have good depth if they have to pick other players. That's what it looks like from the players.
They do. Honestly, they've got so many. Even with the PSL. I mean, look at the emergence of Shahnawaz Dahani from the Multan Sultans. I mean, fantastic. They've got him. You've got Zahid Mahmood. You've got, there's so many fantastic players in Pakistan right now. And with the Qaid Azam Trophy, with the 50 over stuff as well, and the PSL, we're beginning to see them more often. So Pakistan cricket, in my opinion at least, is in a pretty good place at the moment, considering their, not financial difficulties. I think that's a bit harsh, but their limitations financially compared to boards such as Cricket Australia, the ECB, the BCCI. I think Pakistan cricket, they're in a good place right now. I'm going to be honest. And again, in Test cricket, they're playing some really good stuff. So for this series, this tour, I suppose, against the West Indies, I do fancy Pakistan to do quite well.
Yeah, I agree with you. Right, that comes to the end of Cricket Talks. Thank you so much for jumping on. It's been ages I've been rearing to go and been so excited about having you on this channel. So thank you so much for joining.
Honestly, Ethan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Always happy to come back on as well and talk all things cricket, mate. It's been an absolute delight. And fingers crossed, England can get back in the Ashes, and I'll be, even more happy the next time.
Fingers crossed they won't, because I'm an Aussie fan. But no, I do want to see a close series. I do. I'd rather see 2-1 than 5-0, to be honest, because I want to see a close series. But yeah, I'm just looking forward to it. Thank you for joining us. Viewers, subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, whatever. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye for now.